Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 3 of season 2 of Beyond the Crease, a grassroots cricket original podcast. I'm your host, Behram Kazi, and today our panelists are actually in house grassroots cricket rock stars. And of course, they don't need any introduction, Abdullah Ansari and Rayan ul Haq. And we will be discussing Pakistan's, or well, the PCB's revamped first class domestic structure. तो सबसे पहले तो आप दोनों खैरियत से हो? Is everything all good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
All right, then perfect. We'll jump right into it. Acha, so in the revamped structure, of course, departments are back. That's the big news. But interesting year, कि departments will be playing in their own first class tournament called the President's Cup, and then the prestigious first class tournament called the Qaid-e-Azam Trophy. वो अलहदा से खेली जाएगी regions के between, and the 6 regions which were in the previous setup have been bumped up to 8 regions with also a second division जिसके अंदर 10 रीजन खेलेंगे and that is called the Hanif Mohammed Cup or trophy. So what are your thoughts overall, briefly, how do you guys see this change? Do you think it's a positive one?
मेरे ख्याल में there are some good things and some bad things. Importantly, I think कि उन्होंने सोचा कि थोड़ी quality preserve करनी है, तो that's why it's best कि departments and regions separate करें. Otherwise, if you would have had like 16 teams in one competition as was being proposed initially, then that would have been quite problematic. फिर बहुत सारे players खेल रहे होते and the quality would have drastically lowered. But in terms of the regions itself, I think the way that the top division has been decided, obviously, अब 5 साल हो गए since the last tournament according to this system, so it's a bit outdated. So there's some problems that will definitely come up as we go forward, and some of the stronger teams might be playing the second tier competition.
Right. What about you, Ryan?
Yeah, so basically, like it's quite similar to the older systems where there were President Cups around 2013, 14, and even 15. And this also the first division, second division. This is also a thing that has happened in the past. You had Qaid-e-Azam Trophy Gold, and you have Qaid-e-Azam Trophy Silver. So these are all like it's more like a hodgepodge of older systems that they feel might have worked. So they feel like if they can combine some of the pros and cons of the older systems in like 2016, 19, and 2012, 20 to 2014, they can somehow produce the same quality, which I mean, it's up for debate whether there was any quality to begin with, but for people who think those systems worked, it's basically them trying to find a middle ground between all of them. So, in the sense that, yeah, it's in some ways, at least the quality to a certain degree is preserved because of the 8 top teams in both competitions are playing, but it doesn't mean that those are the only 8 top teams. There are other 10 teams, and those 10 teams will also have players that could potentially play for the top 8 teams, but cannot because of either logistical reasons with the departments or their region isn't very good. So that's the issues that could come up. But yeah, basically it's a hodgepodge of the older systems kind of combined together.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, they've come up with this hybrid solution, I suppose, keeping the previous systems in mind. But if we just speak about the one that Imran Khan imposed via Ehsan Mani and Waseem Khan, जिसके अंदर 6 regions थे, and you had a bit of fanfare and fan following coming through the years. Even I was invested. I would care about Northern, right? मगर मैं कभी सुई गैस या वापडा के लिए तो pump up नहीं हुआ. But there was a lot of criticism कि 6 teams aren't enough. Even I was a critic. I think that in a country which has arguably, what, 240 million people now, 6 regions and just 6 teams in your domestic first class structure, I never thought that was enough. क्या 8 काफी है? Do you think that is a good number?
Yeah, so it's 8, but it's technically 18 once you distribute the players. So 18 is a bit much, considering the you will have players who have no real hopes of playing for the national team. Then it becomes a conversation about what is your domestic structure. Is your domestic structure a pipeline for the national team, or is it a system in itself that employs players who can feel that they're playing at least at the highest level of cricket for in their country. So that becomes the conversation. Like it's kind of like Australia versus England in that sense, because you have these guys like county legends, like Darren Stevens and who have never like actually played for England, but everybody in their county knows about them, and they have their own following to that extent. So it obviously becomes that kind of conversation that you want to produce a system that is a pipeline for the national team, or do you want to produce a system that is an employer in its own right? So the old system, that was basically the idea. Okay, we'll just provide a pipeline for the national team. Obviously, you would have wanted more teams. It's funny. Waseem Khan went on a podcast, and he explained that like I also thought that 8 teams were the adequate amount, not six, but. And he prepared this whole presentation to Imran and like presented it to him that see this is why I feel 18 should be enough. And he's like Imran watched the whole presentation quite happily, and then he said, "I think we're going with six." So uh, I mean, both systems weren't perfect, aren't perfect, but yeah, everybody has their pros and cons, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose. And Abdullah Bhai, just enlighten us a bit on the tiered structure. Now, we know that there will be relegation and promotion between the Qaid Azam Trophy and the Hanif Mohammed Trophy. So, kitni teams niche jayenge, kitni teams upar jayenge, and how much will Pakistan's domestic circuit benefit from a tiered structure? Because we see in the county championship, it seems to be bearing fruit. And also, if you look at the football structure around the world, in Europe particularly, so wahan pe bhi relegation and promotion is a very common thing, and it gives teams more to fight for, particularly if they're in that relegation zone or in the promotion zone in the tier below. तो आपको क्या लगता है कि इसमें कितने कोई फायदे हैं, and what are some cons that I might not be able to identify?
Yeah, I think the main thing is that first of all, there will be one team, the bottom team in the Faide Azam Trophy would be relegated, and the top team in the Hanif Mohammed Cup. And similarly, for the departments, there will be a President's Cup, which is like the equivalent of the Faide Azam Trophy, and then the equivalent of the Hanif Mohammed Cup. The second 11 tournament will be like a Patrons Trophy where departments will compete. So same system होगा कि एक team relegate होगी, एक promote होगी. I just think that I personally think that the departments, because they will be able to sign players depending after, first of all, the regional tournaments will be first and then the departmental tournaments. So I'm sure that they will be able to ascertain some of the top performers over time. They will be able to filter them out and pick the best performers. The problem we'll have with the regions is that, like, Sialkot is in the second 11 tournament, they're not in the first 11 tournament. So if Abdullah Shafiq gets the chance to play the Qaid Azam Trophy, is he going to be playing the Hanif Mohammed non first class cup instead, or will Mohammad Huraira be playing for Sialkot, his home team, and then playing the second 11 tournament? So I think these are some of the major concerns. With the old system, you had six teams and six teams representing various the six regions, not regions, but six areas of the country, and then you had their unke second 11 teams thing, and as players would perform in the second 11, they would be promoted up to the first 11. Like in the very first season, Salman Ali Agha was playing for a period for the Southern Punjab second 11, but after he performed really well, he came up to the first 11. He scored 100 there, and I think maybe a second game, and didn't look back. But now you have 10 regions competing in the second 11 tournament, and those regions on their own may not be strong enough to get promoted, is especially like the Balochistan regions where the talent is a bit thinly spread out, even though they have some really good talent, but they might not have like enough to get a team that will be promoted. So then you might see like Balochistan players languishing in the second division because they're unable to get promoted. So these are some of the things among the many problems that can arise going forward.
You brought up the Balochistan region, and Ryan, I have a question for you in particular because you voiced your concerns on Twitter about this as well. Balochistan is an area largely ignored in Pakistan history, and pichle system ke andar, they had that representation. And it's not like you don't get quality cricketers out of the region, right? Abdul Wahid Bangal, Zai Hasibullah Khan, agar thoda piche chale jaye to Bismillah Khan. You do get these international level quality, or at least players who could be, nurtured into international level quality players. So you're missing out on that by not having a regional center over there. और also आप फ्यूचर में ज्यादा अपॉर्चुनिटी नहीं दे रहे बलूचिस्तान के बच्चों को ऊपर आने की, because they won't be in that first division. So I just want to hear your thoughts on all of that.
Yeah, so basically, Balochistan in the system that was currently existing, they were one region, and for like the first 1 or 2 years, it was basically like a retirement home for players who weren't perhaps good enough to make the other five teams, but were good enough to play the Qaid Trophy in general. So it'd be like, okay, just send them to Balochistan because Balochistan's talent was thinly spread at the time.
Hmm.
But because of your second 11 and all such, you had players who, at least like in the first 11s, you had players who weren't from Balochistan, mostly representing Balochistan, which was not ideal. But in the second 11, there was a much better Balochistan representation in general. And when they would do well, then they would get promoted to the first 11 Balochistan teams. So you had like, you could count the players that were in the first year of the competition who were from Balochistan and who were there in the third year. You had people like Mohammad Irfan, who's a left arm spinner. He did
Hmm.
quite well in the Pakistan Cup. He's a left hander and he's a left arm spinner. So he played in one quite aggressive innings. But anyway, players like those were coming through the system now. Now you'll have a situation where you'll have these guys who were developing but may not develop any further
Hmm.
because they're in the second tier competition, and also they're spread across two teams now because Balochistan is going to be represented by Quetta and Dera Murad Jumali.
Hmm.
So these two teams will now have to split up the Balochistan players that were currently not making up a majority Balochistan team. So by splitting them up, you're basically gutting them for the next 4 or 5 years at least,
Hmm.
and expecting them that maybe after maybe 4 or 5 years, because the thing about every domestic system is that if you persist with it long enough, there will be pros that will come out of it. But unfortunately, Pakistan does not persist with any domestic system long enough for there to be any pros. So the cons always present themselves in the first 2 3 years,
Hmm.
and then those are used to change the system in general. So as I said, you have these Balochistan players who are now going to be languishing in the
Hmm.
second division. One prime example of that is obviously Hasibullah. Now Hasibullah he was the highest run scorer in the Pakistan Cup in 2022, and I think so he was the second or third, first highest run scorer in the Pakistan Cup
And they
2020.
won that tournament, right?
Yeah,
Balochistan,
they
theek
won
hai, they
the
weren't
yeah.
particularly impressive in Pakistan's domestic circuit overall, but we saw them rise and they won the Pakistan Cup, which I think was quite big. And there's a representation element to this as well, because if I'm a Balochi kid and my region wins, so shayad mere andar wo shauq paida ho jaye and I get inspired. So you're going to miss out on all of that.
Yeah. So basically, currently, if we look at one example in general, your current test wicketkeeper situation is that you have Rizwan and you have Safraz. Safraz is
Hmm.
older than Rizwan, and you have Rizwan who's around 31 right now, I think. So you're going to eventually need a second backup. You're going to need a test wicketkeeper in around 4 or 5 years. And your options for that currently are Rohin Nazir, who had a pretty bad 2 years prior to this. He had a decent season this season with Northern, but before that he wasn't doing good. So he actually was falling behind Hasibullah in that sense. And when you saw that like when they went to Zimbabwe with Pakistan A, Hasibullah played as the wicketkeeper in the first class games and he got 100. So
Hmm.
he could have been potentially. I don't. His technique is a bit unconventional, so maybe he wouldn't have been a perfect test wicketkeeper. But he was an option for test wicketkeeper if Pakistan need one in the next 4 or 5 years when Rizwan retires or his performances decline. So now you have a situation where he's your perhaps future test wicketkeeper is going to be playing the second division of a first class tournament. That doesn't tell you anything about him. So,
Yeah, no, that is absolutely unacceptable. Sorry, you can finish your thought.
yeah, yeah, that is it.
Acha. So basically, Abdullah Bhai, what I'm hearing is that a lot of quality players will be missing out because they belong to a region which will automatically be placed in the second division. Is there a world in which, similar to the previous system, जिस तरह second 11 of Southern Punjab में first 11 में players आ जाएं, is there a world in the future where the big regions could pluck out important players from other regions in the lower division, जो performers हो वहाँ पे, and then they can represent those regions? I know it's not an ideal scenario, but you want your best to be playing the top competitions, right? So maybe that's a fix.
Yeah, I guess this is one of the things that we'll find out as the system progresses. Like when the initial squads are announced, then we'll see how the players are spread out and if they're only playing for their own regions. I think that there is a little bit of a concept of players interchanging in among the regions, but primarily I think they will be playing for their own region. So it'll be interesting to see how this progresses. I just think that at least in the initial 1 or 2 years, if there are a lot of players playing the second 11 tournament, then what will happen is that the Faide Azam trophy will become a bit of a like a, it won't be given that as it is like not many people care about first class cricket and nobody really pays a lot of attention to it besides a few of us nerds on Twitter. But I think that what will happen is that the President's Trophy and the departmental performances and tournaments might gain precedence. You might see people doing really well in the Faide Azam trophy and not gaining much traction because at the end of the day, the competition will probably be stronger among the departments. So it's just like it's good that they did this, divided the regions and departments, but it may end up causing the Faide Azam trophy to become a bit of a secondary tournament in terms of importance compared to the President's Trophy.
Right, and I'm going to flip this to you, Rayan. It's a very, very valid point by Abdullah Bhai, and I think Daniel Rasool also wrote about it in the piece where this structure was mentioned. That even though Qaid Azam Trophy is the prestigious trophy in Pakistan, but since the departments have that financial muscle, they will be assembling, the more high quality squads, and the President's Cup might be that primary tournament जिससे फिर आप टेस्ट टीम में से लोग select कर सको. So from like a stats perspective, you've got more numbers now, you've got more first class cricket, though आपके पास primary competitions हैं. But do you see, the President's Cup wale players being favored over the Qaid Azam Trophy players, or will they have a more holistic approach to all of this, in your opinion, of course?
Yeah, definitely. There's precedence for this. As I mentioned before, there was a President's Trophy in 2013-14. And in those situations also, in that time, the President's Trophy was given more importance by the selectors than the Qaid Azam Trophy. You can use the example of Tavish Khan, who was very good in the Qaid Azam Trophy, but he would never actually play departmental cricket at the President's Trophy and thus would get ignored by the selectors. So you have those situations where players who do well in Qaid Azam Trophy will be seen to a lesser degree than the President's Trophy, and you can't even blame the selectors for that. It's obviously you're going to rate performances that are happening in a more higher quality setup. You had Rahat Ali, who was doing so well in Qaid Azam Trophy from around 2011 to 2013 or so. But it was only when he performed in the President's Trophy in 2013-14 that he was made a regular in the Test team, and he then played for the Test team from 2014 to 2016. So you will have players who will first have to perform in the Kajal Trophy, get noticed by scouts in the departmental trophy, and they will then pick them up, actually play them, and then if they perform, then they get looked at by the selectors. So now you have a situation where you're first of all depending on the departmental scouts, who I'm sure are quite good, but you're obviously going to be dealing with certain levels of bias because that's always what happens with selectors. There's you anyway have now two filters of selectors. You first have the regional selectors, then you have the departmental selectors, and then you'll have the national team selectors. As opposed to the old system, which was like, okay, you'll have Second 11, if you do well in second 11, you come into first 11. If you do well in first 11, you get to go towards the national team. So here you have like a system that is not completely cohesive to say like, because it's not first 11 or second 11, it's departments and regions. So you will have a certain number of bias that if a player is doing well for the selectors region, he will obviously notice his performances more and then will perhaps favor him more. And that's you'll have players like from Balochistan who were anyway in second 11 of the Qaeda Azam Trophy, like the second division of the Qaeda Azam Trophy, and will not be noticed as much by departmental selectors. I mean, maybe Hasibullah probably will, because Hasibullah is a better, he's more obvious basically. But you will have departmental scouts, you're depending on them now to sift through the talent of the regional system so that you can take a look at the players. And then you will also have situations where departments will want to give the players that they have trusted more chances. Like, even though they may be past the best, but because they're on a contract and they have performed for them in the past, they will want to persist with them more than try a new guy from a second division kind as a trophy, which they don't know will do well or not. At least with this current guy, it'll be like, oh, we know what he can do and could do. So you'll have these kind of situations definitely arise.
अच्छा, here's a question to both of you, and Abdullah bhai, you can answer this first. जब मुझसे कोई पूछता था ना कि what's the fix for this before this structure was announced, because there was a lot of noise कि departments को इस तरह खत्म नहीं करना चाहिए था. Even top cricketers like Mohammad Hafiz and everybody were in favor of departments, right? So of course, this might be wishful thinking in best case scenario or whatever, but I just want your thoughts on it. Wouldn't a hybrid solution wouldn't that have worked best? Like, what if you had HBL Khyber Pakhtunkhwa or SNGPL Balochistan? उस तरह आपके departments भी अंदर आ जाते, and there was more financial muscle going into the regions as well, and maybe you could have built a more competitive sort of circuit or structure as opposed to now this entire disjointed sort of thing.
Yeah, I think initially when the now the old new structure had come, then there was a lot of opposition among the cricketing fraternity, and while everyone opposed it from like amongst people from the outside, you have to think at some point ke the cricketers unhe bhi kuch pata hai, there's some reason why they're in favor of a certain thing. So I'm sure that departmental cricket and all these, the old structure, now the new structure had its pros and cons, but the main thing I felt was in terms of the provincial system, the six associations that were there. I think that if we were living in an ideal world where there weren't all these politics going on and the PCB administration wasn't changing every 2 months and we had some prospect of continuity, then just adjusting it to 8, or even if you're being ambitious, 10 associations, and then continuing with that, empowering them more to set up their own structures and facilities, and especially in terms of how they pick players and everything. That is, I think, something that we'll see in the new system, where it's the 2014 constitution, and I just hope that there's not too much of the aspect of like there must be merit based selections and everything, but I think that was probably something more apparent in this provincial system than in the six associations than in the regional system. And I just feel that departments, I think, according to the latest reports or the few articles that I've read from journalists about this, they're not overly keen on coming back into the cricketing system. Like, they have essentially been they like forced back in to a certain extent. At least many of the ones that were there in the past. Obviously, there have been a lot of new introductions, a lot of new departments have signed up. So having them sponsor the six associations, I don't think that would have necessarily worked. But you could have had different sponsorships. Like, there were periods where the six associations had sponsors and arrangements with companies who were backing them and all, but it's just that it survived for such a brief period that you didn't really allow it the chance to take off. Maybe if you had continued with it over a longer period of time, there would have been more interest in that. So now we're back to the 2014 system where we have to mix these regions and departments together and play that balancing act. And let's see what happens. And you never know if there's a new government in charge next year, then we might be back to the 2019 constitution. So this back and forth, I think, is probably the most harmful thing. Like beyond the whole regions and departments and six associations, I think it would just be better to have some continuity and consistency, to let the problems be realized and then be fixed if there's a will to fix them, rather than just jumping from one system to another because there's a certain patron of the cricket board who wants to do something.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I 100% concur. Ryan, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, definitely. Even when the old system, the old system, was in place, you had teams like UBL who just shut down their departments, and UBL were quite a big team at the time. They had Yunus Khan playing for them and everything, but they just shut down. They said that this is not profitable for us to just keep funneling money into something that's really not giving us any returns, and especially in the everybody knows the state of Pakistan's current economy. It's really not just it's not profitable to run cricket teams of their things, but you can understand why cricketers preferred the departmental system because it would be give them better security in general. And you had these guys again guys who perhaps weren't playing for the national team and perhaps wouldn't anymore, but they were on steady contracts and they would have health insurance and all these things that the provincial associations just don't provide. So you had definitely a system that was benefiting the cricketers. So obviously they wanted that system back in place. But you also have to see that perhaps it was not sustainable because the departments just didn't want to do it anymore. But they've been forced back, and let's see how it goes this time.
Yeah, I mean, fingers crossed. Of course, we will obviously hope for the best. So, quickly then, if you had to pick between this new structure and the Waseem Khan Ehsan Mani structure of six regions, which one would you pick? I know there are pros and cons to everything, but if you just had to pick one, apna rationale bhi bata de saath saath, and Abdullah bhai, you can go first.
Yeah, I think I think the thing I will say about Wasim Khan is that he may not have been aware of a lot of the politics of the country and a lot and some of the underlying realities of the system. He may have come in from the outside with the with obviously Imran Khan's ideas and having to impose them. But I think at the end of the day, I think he had the right intentions. And when the system was set up then in 2019, I think that it was a decent start, even though I think that it was rushed too much. It was done too suddenly. Like PTI came into power in July or August, and the next month the system was in place, and that was clearly too much of a transition to happen in such a short period. But I still think that that was like there was a more professionalized system then in and with improvements and with focus on it, and if you invest in it properly, now the PCB also is in a much better position financially and everything. So I think that it had a lot of scope. With the regions and departments, like we've had this for a very long time in the past, and now we'll have to just see and hope that that the best things can come out of it, the inadequacies can be overcome. But it's just that I just feel that there are too many politics involved. I know that we're discussing this from a very like from a we're sitting on a show and discussing this, and we may not be exactly aware of all the ground realities,
Mhm.
but still, like the problems that this system throws up are just so many that I think it will be a very big a huge task to overcome them all. But still, I still feel that now that this system is in place, let's just let it run for a bit. let's focus on the pitches and the getting good quality equipment for the cricketers and ensuring that the quality of cricket is as good as it can be within this system. But what will probably happen is that we'll see a new system next year anyway, so there's no point of discussing it.
Yeah, who's to say, right? Rayan, your thoughts?
Yeah, so definitely as for the domestic system question, I really like the cohesiveness of the old system, so I would probably prefer that, perhaps with more teams, obviously. But like basically, when you're discussing domestic systems, you have to understand that what are you hoping to accomplish for them, and what you want to accomplish is that you'll never have people actually say, or maybe if they do say them wrong, that oh this system gave us Babar, or this system gave us Shaheen, or this system gave us Shadab.
Hmm.
I'm like, man, you make whatever system you want in the world. Babar, Shaheen, Shadab, Rizwan, all of these guys are gonna rise to the top no matter what. There's no system that produces these guys. This is national talent. You
Hmm.
can sure you can hold them and stuff, but with fast bowlers, even that isn't still. You play fast bowlers, especially in tests, because we're talking test wise. Because ODIs, the Pakistan Cup isn't considered. T20s, you've got the PSL. So you're talking tests.
Hmm.
And in tests, you don't play fast bowlers in your first class system. You just don't. Proper fast bowlers, like 90 plus fast bowlers. Because if you play them for 10 weeks, game after game, they're not going to remain fast bowlers. So you had this system. So you have to see that if you're basically what you're trying to do is you're going to try and find players that complement your national team's top players to the extent that they fit like a glove into that team. And you'll use obviously the easiest example over here is Salman Ali Agha. He was in second 11 in 2019. He got promoted that year. Like the year he did well, he got promoted that year. He did well in first 11, and then he became a regular in the first 11 team. And by 2023, he's pretty much a done for your World Cup squad. So
Hmm.
that's what you would want for your from your domestic system, to have players who are not necessarily the cream of the crop, because the cream of the crop are going to rise up no matter what. You want players who aren't the cream of the crop, who are developed, and the system gives them recognition to that extent that they can then play at a higher level. So that's what you ideally want from your domestic system, and I think that that old system was providing it to a certain extent. Obviously, you had players who were getting shutted off because they were playing second 11 and there weren't enough teams and blah blah blah. But you at least had a system in place that could
Hmm.
potentially make it happen. Over here, then again, like I've said before, there are a lot of filters that you have to go through. It's like you can even use the example of Mubassir or Abrar, who were doing well in the second 11 and got promoted. Mubassir actually got promoted from under 19s to second
Hmm.
11 to first 11 in 1 year. With this current system, you would have that happening over 2 3 years. So
And
you're
he
losing
became
out
the
in
player of the tournament 2 years in a row, right? If
exactly.
I've got that
Yeah.
right.
Yep. So this system might take away years from players' careers because of how slow the promotion may be. But obviously, you have the pros of the system, and obviously, in the end, you're going to just thank God that they didn't put departments and regions together,
Hmm.
because that was the worst solution ever. Because you had the departments would just hoard all the good players, and then they would whip the regions, and you would then have a situation where you can't look at region versus region matches because those are low quality. You can't go and take conclusions from department versus region matches because those are miles better players playing against second 11 players. So you could only really consider department versus department matches. That's like 25% of your first class
Hmm.
system you can only consider, and the other 75% you basically have to throw out the window. So the sample size was extremely small. So at least it's not that, but obviously you don't have a more cohesive system anymore. But it could potentially work as long as the departmental scouts are good, and they look at numbers and don't have as much bias. So yeah, basically my end point is that domestic systems, they don't make your Babas, they don't make your Shadabs, they don't make your Shahins. They make guys like Salman Ali.
Yeah, no, I think both of you made fantastic and very, very valid points, and our viewers have definitely been enriched with a lot of knowledge and perspective. If you ask me from a fan's perspective solely, I also preferred the previous system because I would be stoked for Northern versus KP. But do I care about Lahore Whites versus Lahore Blues or Sui Southern National Gas versus the other Sui Gas, the Sui Gas Derby? No, I do not care about these things. But anyway, here's to hoping that things work out and Pakistan continues to produce top talent. And there are more Salman Ali Aghas that come out of the system, more importantly. Just to end this show, I just want to take a quick wager. So, Abdullah Bhai, you can go first and then Rayan. How long is this structure lasting?
I'll give it 2 years.
Okay,
Two
then.
years.
And you,
I'll
Rayan?
give it, I'll give it one
Yeah, I think I'm going to
without
go
any
with,
changes. I've
yeah.
definitely seen some changes after a year.
Yeah, I mean, given the whole political situation, you never know. It might even be less than a year. But here's to hoping that there is continuity because, as we've mentioned in this podcast, that is the most important thing with respect to having a successful domestic structure. Thank you so much to both of you, Abdullah Bhai and Rayan, for taking out the time and indulging in this very, very important conversation. And thank you to all viewers as well for tuning in for similar content. Stay tuned. Brought to you by Grassroots Cricket.